Some people feel drained by crowds and recharged by silence. And that's not a weakness. If anything, it's a clue. Because for a lot of people, being alone is uncomfortable. They need something. Noise, interaction, distraction. But for others, being alone feels natural. Not exciting, not dramatic. Just right. You might recognize this in yourself. You don't avoid people out of fear. You're not anxious in social situations. You can talk to people just fine. But you don't feel the need to always be around them. You can spend hours on your own and not feel bored. In fact, sometimes you look at the time and realize it passed much faster than expected. You don't instinctively reach for your phone just to fill the space. You don't need something playing in the background all the time. Silence doesn't bother you. And when you do spend time with people, it can be great. But at some point, you feel like going back to being on your own. Not because something went wrong, not because you didn't enjoy it, just because that's where you reset. And that's usually where the misunderstanding starts. From the outside, it looks similar to something else. People tend to interpret it as withdrawal. You're isolating yourself. You should go out more. Isn't that lonely? Sometimes it's said casually, sometimes with concern. But over time, it creates a subtle pressure, like you're doing something slightly wrong. Like there's a normal level of social interaction, and you're below it. And if you hear that often enough, you might start questioning it yourself. But enjoying being alone and feeling lonely are two completely different things. They just look similar from the outside. Loneliness is when you want connection, and it's not there. There's a sense of lack, something missing. Solitude is when you're alone, and that's exactly where you want to be. No tension, no gap to fill. Just space. And some people don't just accept that space. They actively prefer it. Not all the time, but regularly. And for reasons that are actually quite structured. Part of it has to do with how your brain handles stimulation. Social environments are not neutral. Even simple interactions require processing. You're listening, responding, reading expressions, adjusting your tone. There's a constant stream of input. For some people, that's energizing. It gives them momentum. For others, it's different. It's not overwhelming in a dramatic way. It's just costly. It takes energy. So after a while, there's a natural need to step away. Not to recover from something bad, but to return to a baseline. And when you're alone, that baseline is easier to access. There's less noise, less interruption, less demand on your attention. So your mind can slow down or go deeper, depending on what it wants. There's also something else that's less obvious. When you're comfortable being alone, it usually means your inner world is not empty. You can think. You can follow ideas without losing interest after a few seconds. You can sit with a question and let it unfold. You can replay conversations, rethink decisions, explore possibilities. Not in a compulsive way, just naturally. And that changes your relationship with silence. Because for many people, silence feels like a void. There's nothing to hold on to. So they fill it with music, with scrolling, with conversations that don't really matter. But if your inner world is active, silence is not empty. It's available. It's usable. This is where things like clarity tend to emerge. Not when you're constantly reacting, but when nothing is pulling your attention. You can notice patterns. You can connect things that didn't seem related before. You can arrive at conclusions that feel yours, not something you picked up from somewhere else. And this doesn't happen instantly. It requires time without interruption, which is something that has become relatively rare. Because if you look at how most environments are structured now, there's almost no natural space left. Notifications, messages, content. Something is always trying to pull you outward. And if you're used to responding to that, constantly, being alone can actually feel uncomfortable at first. So choosing solitude, especially regularly, is not the default anymore. It's almost a deliberate move. Not in a dramatic sense, just a quiet decision to step away from constant input. There's also a form of independence in this. If you're okay being alone, you're less dependent on external validation. You don't need someone else's reaction to stabilize how you feel. You don't need to be entertained all the time. You can generate your own engagement. And that has consequences, because now your mood is less tied to what's happening around you. You're not constantly reacting to the environment. You have a certain autonomy. This doesn't mean you don't value people. It doesn't mean you prefer isolation over connection. It just means connection is a choice, not a necessity. And this is where another misunderstanding comes in. People often assume that if you enjoy being alone, you must struggle socially. But that's not necessarily true. In many cases, it's the opposite. When you're not using people to avoid discomfort, you don't need anything from them. You're not trying to fill a gap. You're not trying to escape silence. So when you interact, it's cleaner, more direct, less loaded. You can actually listen. You can actually be present, because you're not internally pulling away or seeking something. There's also less pressure. You don't need the interaction to go well in order to feel okay, which makes the interaction easier. And this creates a kind of paradox. People who are comfortable being alone often have better relationships, not because they seek more of them, but because they don't depend on them. Now, of course, there's a limit to everything. Enjoying solitude doesn't mean avoiding people completely. At some point, lack of connection does become loneliness. That distinction matters. But what often gets overlooked is this. A lot of people are not avoiding solitude because they need connection. They're avoiding it because they're not comfortable with what happens when nothing is there. If you are comfortable in that space, that's not something trivial. It means you can sit with yourself without needing to escape. And that's not as common as it seems. So enjoying being alone is not a flaw. It's not something to fix. It's a different configuration. It means you can reset on your own, think without interruption, stay engaged without constant input. In a world that is increasingly designed to keep you externally focused, that's actually a form of stability. Being at ease in your own presence, without needing to fill every gap, without needing constant stimulation. And if you think about it, that's a form of freedom. Not dramatic, not visible, but very real. If this resonates, you probably already knew most of this. You just didn't frame it this way. And sometimes, that's enough to see it differently.